Today is Friday, April 17th, 2009, and we're in Stillwater, Oklahoma. My name is Karen Newrohr. I'm a librarian at Oklahoma State University, and I'm here to interview Chris Simon, who is an independent filmmaker, and she's going to talk about that in the interview. But we're here today as part of a project, an oral history project for the OSU Library. The project is titled Remembering Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel, Poet and Oklahoma Dust Bowl Immigrant. And this is, as I said, an oral history project of the OSU Library. Thank you, Chris, for participating in our interview today.
I'm happy to do so.
Okay, I'd like to know a little bit about how your project, would you hold up the film there and show us for the interview? So tell me about this project. What's the title of your film?
Well, it ended up being Down an Old Road, The Poetic Life of Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel. I had at one point thought of changing it, but Wilma would have none of that and threatened me, in fact, with pulling all her permissions. So I left it the same, but this is a 40-minute film documentary on her that was about 4 or 5 years in the making. What was the question?
How did you learn about Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel? How did you first hear about her?
I was trying to remember that, and I was actually, the film had been planned to be something different. I was planning to do a film, I think it was called, something about valley patchwork, but it was on the Central Valley of California it's a rural or largely rural area. It has waves of immigration that have come in to the different, depending on who's arriving at when, and the Okies are one of them, Mexicans, Portuguese, Armenians, you name it, everybody's there. My original plan was to make a film on 4 different cultural groups within the valley, and I think it was Okies, Armenians, Mexicans, and probably Portuguese. So all of it based on largely on music, really. So, but in the process of researching that, I ran into Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz's book and talked to her, and she said, you should talk. I was looking for an Okie to represent Okie culture, and she suggested Wilma. She says she gave me her phone number, but I can't really recall that. I also talked to Lillian Valley, who is in the film and is actually Wilma's literary executor, and she also recommended I go down there and talk to Wilma. So as one of the 4 people, I did go down there, and I can remember standing on the corner. I was at a truck stop making the phone call to Wilma, and she was not receptive at all. She basically told me to just go away. And I said, well, how about if I call back tomorrow and see how you're feeling? She gave me every excuse in the book. She wasn't feeling well. She was saying no, clearly. And so I called her back the next day, and she had totally changed her mind. I never did find out why. I don't know whether she called up Roxanne and asked, but Roxy has never said that. Or whether she just, thought I was a nice girl. One of her first questions were, "Are you an Okie?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And I probably babbled something, but I love Okie culture, blah, blah, which is all true. And anyway, so in the 24 hours I was standing at another truck stop, and she said, "Come on down." And she liked me, hit it off, and let me come out and do some filming, which is a very, invasive project. So
how did you approach your filming when you obviously you made the contact with her, and at that point you were starting to realize, I guess, that you were going in a new direction with this project.
Yeah.
So what did you do from there?
I did realize after I met her that And the other people that I was working with, it was just proving difficult. I had limited funding, and I thought, well, Wilma was such an incredible subject, and her poems just blew me away because they really were about, I felt like I knew all those people. And it was such a vivid portrait of Okie culture. And while I'm not an Okie, I grew up surrounded by Okies. So they're a major defining cultural factor in my life. And but when I do a film, I don't necessarily, try to engage the process of discovery as I'm making it rather than, going in there with a preconceived concept. I like to think about the viewer just making the discovery and I'm making the discovery for them. Because if you go and you know everything already, you overlook the obvious that somebody who doesn't know anything is going to want to see. So we showed up there. I had a crew from San Francisco. At that time, I didn't shoot my own film, so I was working with a guy named Jamie Kibbett, who's a wonderful filmmaker. He was the cameraman, and we had corralled a young woman, excuse me, named Megan Shear to be the sound recorders. And I think that was her first time doing sound. And but what I did know about them and what I was looking is that they were very nice people who would be as unobtrusive as possible, and Wilma would like them for sure. And so above technical skills, that was the most important. So we went in, I think actually the first time we filmed was when we went down to the Dust Bowl days.
Could we talk about that a little bit?
Well, the Dust Bowl days are a celebration of Okie culture, and I think that was in '98. That was the first time that they happened. They were down at the Weed Patch Camp, which is actually in Arvin. It was built in the 1930s for farm workers and is still in use today. So Doris Waddell, who is not an Okie either, I don't believe. But she also had this fascination of Okie culture and wanted to celebrate the people who survived and prospered and just the power of the human spirit to overcome. So went down there. It was like a fair. There were they had like square dancing. They had lots of kids there trying to getting the extra credit. They had one of the people that was there was the grandson of the migrant mother, the woman that Dorothea Lange took the photograph of. Oh, wow. And he said his grandmother was very ashamed of that photograph because it portrayed her at the lowest point in her life. But he wasn't ashamed of it. He was proud of it, and he was certainly very proud of where the family had gone since then. So he had a display with that and telling the story of the family after that photograph. And I think that there was a lot of that. In the Central Valley, Okie is still very close to a fighting word. I don't generally say that if I'm doing a showing in the Central Valley. I'll be very careful. I'll let Wilma say it first before I use the word because it's still, for the older folks, is not a good word. The hurt is so deep. I also had a lot of people, I had tried to do a film on Okie culture before, and a lot of people would not talk to me. Even very successful people. They just did not want to remember it. Steinbeck, they were ashamed of that book. So it was kind of an uphill battle. You would think that people would want to celebrate how far they'd come, but no. They really would like to just forget it. So Wilma is very different in that way because as she embraces that. And I think that the portrait she's drawn of the Okies is really the one we should be looking at because Steinbeck was not an Okie. That was at one point in time that, it was a political novel, not a novel about a culture, which people don't really get, I think. People who study it get it, but the average person on the street wouldn't think of it that way. But so it was a big music festival. There were the Red Dirt Rangers were there, and Wilma just totally fell in love with them. I mean, really. And they with her, and I was filming. It was difficult for me that because I don't usually work with a crew, and so. But it also was, ironically, there was this huge dust storm that day.
Oh.
As we came in, there was this giant windstorm and dust everywhere. So it was extremely authentic. But Wilma read her poems, you can see this all in the film. Mm-hmm. And she wowed the crowd, I think. And anyway, we captured a lot on film, and I'm glad because I think it's still going on. I'm sure it's grown.
Have you been back to the festival at all?
I have not. I mean, it seems like every time it's happening, I'm on the road. Mm-hmm. I'd like to go back. Mm-hmm. Did you go?
No, I haven't been. I would like to.
Yeah, I think Doris did a great job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, on the back cover of one of the books that Back 40 Publishing has about Wilma, there's an interesting picture there. The title of that book is Getting Love Down Right, poetry by Wilma Elizabeth McDaniel. And when you turn over to the back cover, we see quite an interesting shot there. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that is John Cooper of the Red Dirt Rangers kissing Wilma's hand. Very courtly, very handsome. I said, every woman that sees this photograph goes, but it was a lucky shot. I mean, I took it, and I just happened to turn around at the right moment and snap it. But Wilma, boy, she talked about that for years. But I would have too, I admit. I think you should ask John what came over him.
I think we did talk about that when we interviewed him for this project. So it's in the oral history interview. If you want to know what John thinks about it, you'll have to listen to that interview.
Well, you can see why Wilma was charmed.
Oh, well, certainly.
But I think the other reason that she was so thrilled to meet the Red Dirt Rangers is, she saw them as the real deal. And here were her Oklahoma roots coming back to her, and these handsome young men. And she was also very taken with the fiddler they had at the time,
Benny Craig. Yes.
Benny Craig, yes. Mm-hmm. She just thought he was the most wonderful singer, and he was.
Well, there's also another story about the festival that you have in your documentary, but I think you could talk to it a little more in the interview here, and it has to do with a song request that Wilma had. Tell us about that.
Yes, I mean, Wilma had asked the Red Dirt Rangers before the end of the festival. I mean, what we see in the film is actually she read several times. That she said, "Oh, my mother's favorite song was Karine Karina," and I never really understood why I wasn't supposed to sing it. But she said it wasn't appropriate. But I would just love for you boys to sing it. And they said, "Oh, great! We don't know that song." And I think the guys thought that was the end of it. But when she got up on stage, and they were there with her, she sweetly looked in the microphone and said, "Now the guys are going to play my mother's favorite song, Karine Karina." And if you look in the film, you can see John Cooper just going, "Ah!"
What were you thinking? You were filming it.
I had already known this, or maybe I didn't know it at the time. But it was obvious from their reaction that they didn't want to do the song. And it was also obvious from their performance that they did not know the song. But they gave it a good shot and stumbled through. And yeah, I was laughing because, what you see in the film is a relatively good performance, but I will say I don't think that that's the Rangers' best performance. But I cut it down a lot. They trampled through several verses, and I think I only put in one. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have been fair to put put the whole thing in. But I know, the other night they played it, and I noticed they still don't know the words. They were reading them, but at least that's an improvement.
They don't get many requests for that song, I think. That's not their usual
right
repertoire of songs there. So from the time that you met Wilma and you started filming, what kind of time process does it take to put together something, or did it take to put together this particular film?
I would say it was a 5-year process, although when I say that, I was including the film. There was probably a couple years before I met Wilma. The film came out in 2001. I think we filmed down there 3 or 4 times with Wilma, but most of the time I'm sorry to say, spent raising money. Mm. This is a very low budget feature. I mean, a lot of people did it labor of love. I know that I was given like the editing suite and all these things for free, which is a good thing because I had some funding from the National Endowment for the Arts and the NEA, or the NEA and the California Council for the Humanities. Mm-hmm. And I think some more. I just don't remember it now, but it took a long time. And we went down, I think it was 4 times, getting images that would go with Wilma's poems, because that was key to me. I was treating them like music, and I wanted to have a lot of images of the Central Valley, which is a place that's I love very much, and that was one of the things I wanted to portray in the film. Mm-hmm. It was a portrait of Wilma, it was a portrait of her poetry, and it was a portrait of the Central Valley. Mm. So, yeah, we went down. I can remember, Wilma was light sensitive. I can remember my cameraman, Jamie, turning to me and she was, "What have you done to me? I was supposed to film somebody that can't use lights." And he was really upset, but he did, he rose to the occasion. We filmed the main people around her. Jim Chebla, who's the publisher of Back 40 Publishing. Lillian Valley, who's another poet up in Modesto, and a wonderful, wonderful poet. She's the executor of Wilma's now, but also her editor. I'm trying to think. Gerald Haslam, who is a professor, but he is an Okie from Oildale, which is the okiest of the Okie places. Grew up with Merle Haggard as his best friend, kind of big rival. Let's see, who else? Those are the main people, I think. Oh, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And also her ex-husband, Simon Ortiz. I was trying to get all the very many voices that surrounded Wilma. Mm-hmm.
And you, when you started this, you said that you first learned about Wilma through Roxanne's book, and the book title is Red Dirt, Growing Up Okie.
Yes. And
so how did you find Roxanne's book?
Well, I guess it was, I do remember it was on, no, I don't know.
Okay.
It was out there and I found it.
Uh-huh.
Maybe she did a reading, or maybe it was just, I was in Berkeley at the time, so actually it was probably on a bookstore. Mm-hmm. And I saw it. That's something that I would have picked up immediately.
You mentioned that this was there were 3, this is the story of 3 things, really. The Central Valley, the Wilma, and her poetry.
Yeah.
What were the things that had to be in this film?
There had to be music.
Why is that?
Well, for my mind, music is absolutely central to telling the Okie story. I probably should have said it was a story of, the Central Valley, Wilma, and the Okie people, and her, because the poetry is Wilma.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought music is central to it, to my view of Okie culture, and also I like music. I think that when you're dealing with poetry, that is a music.
Mm-hmm.
So it's appropriate. No, I forgot the rest of the question.
How did Wilma feel about music?
Oh, Wilma loved music. She loved she loved Merle Haggard. She loved the Maddox Brothers and Rose. Woody Guthrie was God.
Oh.
She really liked Dave Alvin, who's a younger singer with Okie roots. And she liked his rendition of specifically Do Re Mi, which is one of Woody Guthrie's songs. Who else? So she Buck Owens, of course. She really was that was the music she listened to. Mm-hmm. It was the Bakersfield sound, basically, or older. She didn't wander real far from that.
So in putting together the film, you included the music in there. You had to go through some process to be able to do that. Can you talk to that just a little bit? For
posterity.
For someone who might, be interested in doing what you do, and so what is that like to have to get permissions, I guess?
Well, permissions are hell. In fact, I've sworn that the next film, unless it's a film about a specific music, that I'm going to get it scored by someone, because it's very unpredictable as to how much money it would cost. In fact, when you're working with a budget of $30,000 and people want $10,000 for a song, it's they don't comprehend that. So I do work around some, like Merle Haggard gave me permission himself for a song I use, but technically that is not real. But the other hard thing about using music is it's hard to find the right music. Yeah. I must have spent hours and hours and hours listening to different cuts of songs. Mm-hmm. Because with Woody Guthrie music, I use it to tell the story of the Okies, and then there's a lot of just music without words too. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what about the photographs?
Well, the photographs, I use a lot of historical photographs to evoke a place and time that Wilma's talking about, and to show, it is a story about the people who migrated to California from Oklahoma and across in the Southwest. But those photographs are from the Library of Congress, the Farm Security Administration. And that's another happy way to spend hours and hours of one's valuable time. But yeah, those are free for use to anybody, and it is an incredible portrait of America at a time that was devastating. And put with music and movements on the photographs, they become alive and poignant and able to tell the story in, I think, an extraordinary way.
Where did you access the photographs?
At that time, I guess they were online, but you had... I have real photographs that I ordered, so I think maybe at that time some of them were online. They're all online now. Mm-hmm. But I do remember going back to DC and actually picking out photographs, and I have the physical photographs, so that must have been how it started out anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But boy, and I tried to get photographs that weren't real well known. Mm-hmm. There's a few in there that are, but there's so many to choose from. Why have Migrant Mother when you can have 600 others that people haven't seen much? Mm-hmm. And I could not have done the film without those photographs. It would have been absolutely impossible.
What else needed to be in this film?
Well, a lot of shots of the Central Valley, and because that's a place that people don't understand how beautiful it is, and people don't understand how important it is to the story of the Okies. And I didn't understand until I got here how much it looks like Oklahoma either. But so you meant what should have been in there that isn't in there?
No, I was thinking about the church scenes.
Ah, yes. Well, that had to be in there because Wilma, unlike most Okies, she converted to Catholicism at an early age. I mean, the other, Gerald Haslam is also Catholic, ironically. He's half Mexican, but I have the two Catholic Okies in the state of California in this film. But anyway, and spirituality was absolutely key to understanding Wilma. She would have been a Carmelite nun. In fact, I have to say, a big part of me wonders why she wasn't one after her mother died. So in that scene, we were very fortunate. It was a confirmation day at Wilmas Catholic Church when we went in there. And Jamie, the photographer, just loves kids. And he's spending all his time shooting those adorable children, taking their photograph. And, we were really fortunate to run into that. And then I put it together with music, a gospel piece from the Maddox Brothers and Rose to try to convey the route that she came from with music and where she's gone with the picture. And I think it works wonderful, but some people
Oh no, I think it does too.
Some people don't. So her spirituality, images of what she's talking about, I think, and the land. Wilma really loves the land. Some of her poems are, one of the ones in the film is about her two lovers. And you go, lovers? Whoa. But they're the Cimarron River here and the San Joaquin, must be. Merced. The Merced over there. Mm-hmm. And there's the San Joaquin. The Merced goes into the San Joaquin. So we spent a lot of time, I don't even know if I used them, but we spent a lot of time actually out there filming that. Unfortunately, the Merced River isn't in very good shape anymore. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
Some of the other things in there, there's a birthday party.
Yes.
In there. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that was I think it was her 82nd birthday. And she's born right before Christmas. I think it's the 23rd.
22nd.
22nd, mm-hmm. Okay. So that's why you see a Christmas tree coming in. She is beloved by so many people. She is an extremely reclusive person. So I have to say, I was going, why? How did she meet all these people?
Did you set up for everyone to come for the party?
No, it was it was happening, and we were at the party. So I filmed it. That was the first time I had ever shot a film. Well, no, not, but that was me shooting that one. And you can tell I'm not that experienced, but it's extremely cramped quarters, and there were a lot of people in there to have the lights and all that. Mm-hmm. It was a very difficult shooting situation. Plus, you can't stumble over everybody, and you don't want to totally interfere with the proceedings. And I think we did a pretty decent job, but it's not my finest cinematographic moment.
Does it surprise you that we talked about place a little bit, and you talked about the two rivers, and does it surprise you that even though Wilma only spent 17 years in Oklahoma, that she held on to that for the rest of her life like she did in her writings?
No, it doesn't surprise me. First of all, it was, she was, I think those 17 years were I mean, for all of us, that's pretty key. Those are the years that form you. And she was wrenched away from it under very dire and horrible circumstances after already, I'm sure, seeing lots of people she knows, being shut out and having to go. I mean, all around her, people are leaving. Even though I now know that this area wasn't part of the Dust Bowl, really, it still was part of the collapse of the tenant farmer system. And how devastating to lose all your friends already and then be taken away from what you already know to go to California. They called it the Promised Land, and it wasn't. So I suspect that was also something of a shock. I mean, Wilma's family never had it as rough. They weren't in the camps. Mm-hmm. They had family to go to. They did farm labor, but they were definitely not as bad off as a lot of things. But, I mean, the other reason it would stick is the way the Okies were treated once they got there. Okie was essentially the same as nigger. And you would see signs that said, no Okies are niggers. And I'm sorry to use that word, I hate it, but it has to be used in this case. And that prejudice was there when I was growing up. Much more prejudice against the Okies at that point than blacks.
Where did you grow up? In what area?
I grew up in Southern California, but my grandma and grandpa and the rest of the family all lived up in the Central Valley in basically the same area as Wilma. So, I was well aware of all that, and I know, she would have felt it immensely. One of the things and it's throughout her poetry, mm-hmm. People would deny their roots a lot. But she also, she spent a lot of time indoors taking care of people, and yet she was so observant. So her poetry deals with the other cultures that Okies met. So like Mexican, Portuguese, Chinese, she lived over. So all that, it's a portrait of the whole Central Valley. It's not just, her life in Oklahoma or here. So that's one of the things that draws me to it. Because even though the story begins in Oklahoma, it certainly doesn't end there. Mm-hmm.
Were there things that you thought about including but you weren't able to, or I don't know?
Yeah, millions, and but it's hard for me to remember. I mean, I know that let's see, there were things that I filmed that I didn't keep in, but I cut them out for a reason. I mean, like there was a big discussion between Wilma and Roxanne and Jerry Haslam and Lillian Valley about the poetry, and that got cut out because it was interesting for, academics, mm-hmm. Very interesting, mm-hmm. but I was trying to do something that would go to the public. I would have liked to have had Buck Owens reading the poem about Buck Owens, but I could never arrange it. Mm-hmm. And I would like to have Merle Haggard in there reading some of her poetry too, but I could never manage that either. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, my original thought, I think, was to have several other people read her work, but it just didn't work out. Mm-hmm. And it was fine. I would have had more scenery in. Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
How did Wilma feel about the finished product?
I'm happy to say Wilma loved it. Every time I spoke to her from then on out, she would talk about it. And, some of the things she'd always say is, oh, that big Indian boy, and by which she meant Benny Craig, who mm-hmm. really got to her heart with his singing and his passing. Yeah, she felt it terrible. She loved seeing the different photographs. I mean, the thing that I would have included actually is more of her poetry if I could have. Mm-hmm. And some of the reasons I didn't is they just didn't have images to go with it, which is too bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, I actually did try a few scenes where we set stuff up to try to illustrate, and it just didn't work. Mm-hmm. So, Yeah, she loved it. I had given her a version that was, I mean, the finished version is 40 minutes, and she had one that was probably an hour. It had all of the stuff I had cut out at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And she liked that the best.
Oh, of course.
Of course, you know, you like seeing all your friends, and she watched it a lot.
Were you ever with her when she watched it?
Oh yeah, many times, and she just, you know, it just truly satisfied her. Yeah, it really satisfied her, and that, of course, is the most important part for me.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I created a document that meant so much to her, and I think, you know, it means a lot to the people that see it too.
Absolutely. What do you hope people take away from viewing it?
I hope that they take away, I mean, a knowledge and love for poetry, first of all, but also a understanding and a pride in the Okie culture that's in California. Because Okies did come in and change the state, and I personally think in a good way. And they're unacknowledged because they're not easy to differentiate as an ethnic group. And they went through a hell of a lot. So that's what I would like. That was one of my goals at the beginning, to bring an understanding.
Okay, when the film was finished, was there an event? Was there a tour?
Yes, we had. Actually, we had like a pre-opening. The film opened in Modesto at an old historic theater, and everybody came. It wasn't full, but at that point the film was almost an hour. Mm. And I went back home after seeing it on the big screen, cut out the 15 minutes I was talking about. Mm-hmm. So then we had another premiere down in Merced at the junior college there. And that one was huge. That was at least 500 people came. It was standing room only. And because Wilma's pretty well known there. And
was she there?
Oh yeah, she was there. I mean, that was one of the times she ventured out. We went up and we spent the night there, which was a really big deal for Wilma. And she thoroughly enjoyed it. You know, she's corsage, the queen of the day, and she had there were a bunch of other poets there reading her work. I know John Doffelmeyer, one of the cowboy poets, was there, and I wish I knew who everyone. Gerald Haslam read. I can't remember, but you know, it was a big, wonderful celebration of Wilma. And then later on, I did a tour throughout California, not just the Central Valley, of libraries, and they would bring me out and have talking, yap, and then the film, and I really enjoyed that because we were truly reaching out to the rural parts of the state where, first of all, there would be a lot of Okies there, and secondly, those are places that are usually underserved and not noticed. And we would have, I can remember like playing, I think it was, I can't remember. It was near Arosa, outside of Fresno. And it was a little tiny Carnegie library, and maybe 5 people showed up, but those 5 were enchanted, and it increased pride, especially among the older folks that have had such a difficult struggle with being Okies. And then, then there were other places like Bakersfield that there were 150, 250 people there. So it varied immensely. Mm-hmm. And then there was the one time that this was down in Southern California, where it was me, my best friend, her husband, and the librarian.
Okay, what is your organization like for film projects? How do you you take the footage? Has your equipment changed from the time when you shot this film, or how has that changed? What's the organization like?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, things have totally changed since I shot this film. Actually, this was shot in video, but it was not digital video. It was analog. It was Betacam, I think. Must have been. But anyway, whatever it was. Yeah, it was on Beta. Big tapes. So that required a big camera. And that required, cameraman, because I could not hold that thing.
Too heavy?
Too heavy for me. I see women holding it all the time, but, at that time there were not women cameramen. I mean, this wasn't very long ago, but of my age, there were not women cameramen, I should say. So, yes, it required a big old bulky guy. And then we had a separate sound machine, which is an Haggard tape recorder. Big, heavy thing again. So we took some lights. I mean, a 3-person crew is pretty standard for a documentary, I think. Maybe 4. Because you get many more than that, and you're in Hollywood land, and it really interferes. So that was our basic equipment. And then you come home, you transfer it. I was editing on computer then, so you have to transfer it into a computer and digitize it. So that's the same as it is nowadays. And then, it took months and months and months. I edited on film at least 9 months. At least. Not necessarily full time, but it was a long process. And part of me, I like the long process because, it's really good to stop. I don't agree with, going through and slamming through a film in a month or 3 weeks or whatever. You need time to, when you're doing a well-crafted film and not just informational, you need that time to create that crafting. It doesn't come easy. And so, yeah, it took a long time. And then at the end, there were all the technical things that I had to bring in my friends to help with animating the stills. For instance, that's not a skill I had. And mixing the sound, getting the color corrected. I was fortunate, I worked with people. Actually, Jamie Kibben, my cameraman, was the one that did both the sound and the mix. And he allowed me to use his editing facility. And I'm sorry, he was killed, so I'm taking a little pause. But he was huge in helping this film happen after the fact. So, yeah. Was
he engaged with the project on a certain level because of Wilma?
Yes, I think so. He, after his initial being alarmed and not being able to use lights, he came to love Wilma. And Jamie was remarkably helpful. He was center of the independent film scene in San Francisco. And, he allowed me to use his editing room for free. He did all that, the mix and all that was for free. I traded him work, but... yeah, it wouldn't have happened without him. So.
And the film has won an award?
Well, the one I'm proudest of is it won the Oral History Association's Media Prize for 2003. They have, it's not a very nice term, but it's like non-print media or whatever. Anyway, it's their media prize, and so I'm really proud of that. That's a national prize. And being a folklorist, I'm thrilled to have had that award. And it also won in various film festivals. I know it won Best Documentary at the Heartland Film Festival, which is in Nebraska. And that was actually the panel was all Native American there, and that awarded it. So that was very wonderful for me also. Those are the 2 big prizes. I got money with that one, so I remember that.
Is there anything else you would like to share about the film?
Well, it was a long and winding road, and for me, it was like I said. I mean, the connections have lasted throughout the years, and being able to be one of the people that knew Wilma was such a huge privilege. I mean, everybody will tell you that, I'm sure. She, she was a very unusual lady, and she, in her quiet way, I mean, she opened up a whole new world to me. That poetry, to this day, just, I'm not much of a poet. I mean, I've made several films about poetry, but I mean, I'm not a poet, and I'm not the type that sits at home and reads poetry. Mm-hmm. Except for Wilma's, I will on occasion pick that up. Mm-hmm. And it's because of the good memories, but it's still the way it was a key. I recognize those people. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them.
Okay, I want to ask you a few questions about Wilma. I think we've already talked about her values, some of them anyway. Her spirituality. Mm-hmm. She valued music. Music is poetry. Poetry is music. What about family? What about her family?
Well, she came from I think there were 6, I'm not sure the number of kids, but they all came out. She was close to them all, I think. But she was particularly close to her mother, who she lived with her mother's entire life and took care of her. I mean, she was essentially a nurse for her mother. She also did farm work and other domestic work, mm-hmm. as I understand it.
Did she talk about that, her work at all?
No. Her work is her poetry. That's the way she would perceive it. The other stuff would just have been making a little bit of living. Mm-hmm. So it had nothing to do with her, mm-hmm. really. And then her sister Opal, she was very close to. Opal was younger, and she was a real hottie, I guess, and very talented. And so, I mean, quite the opposite. I never met Opal, but she was quite the opposite from Wilma, from what I understand. Very outgoing. Mm-hmm. And so they lived together until Opal died, too. When I met her, she lived in a subsidized housing right across from the graveyard. And she said, only one more trip to make, or one more move to make. And she lived in the same facility with her older brother, Roy, mm-hmm. who never really got what Wilma was up to, but he was there anyway.
Mm-hmm. You met Roy?
Oh yeah, I mean he was always there. He'd come over and play cards every day afternoon, and he'd always act surprised to see all these people, and you could just see him kind of scratching his head. Well, okay. But she was kind of funny about it. I mean, she didn't invite him in. She invited him in the house, but she didn't, go like running to him and say, "Here's my latest book," or nothing. She just, mm-hmm. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Just talk about her personality and her mannerisms.
She was very quiet and very withdrawn. I mean, she would laugh, but it wouldn't be a real blast. It'd be more like, and she was very serious. So, yeah, she wasn't a bundle of laughs. But I think that the caring and her deep felt sentiments, shined through, and I think that was one thing that was so attractive. I mean, she would say, "Oh, bless his heart, he tried so hard," or whatever. I think Jerry Haslam in the film says something about old Buck, mm-hmm. and she would talk about Buck. She would talk about a lot of people she didn't actually know as family, like Buck Owens was one. Merle Haggard's another. I mean, mm-hmm. to my knowledge, well, she met Buck, but I know she never met Merle, and they were part of her life. And like I say, the Red Dirt Rangers, who she met once, they became an extremely important part of her life. She would phone people, mm-hmm. and she would write, mm-hmm. but it was very interesting. I mean, one of the people she told me who greatly admired her work was Charles Bukowski. Now, that is not a match made in heaven. I mean, it's hard for me. When she said that, I was like, what? I was talking about someone the opposite of Wilma. But they evidently, I corresponded and you know, you just never know. I mean, I think that obviously her poetry was the reason they would correspond.
Do you know anyone else she corresponded with or kept in?
Oh my God, there's thousands. Roxanne would probably know better, but I'm trying. There's like, I've forgotten his name. He's a pottery. He makes pottery and he lives out in Tuscarora, Nevada, which is truly the back of beyond. How did they ever get in touch? I don't know. But she corresponded a lot with him. Her first cousin was Ralph Finster, a famous American folk artist. And they did some correspondence. She had signed pieces by him. But she was very shy about it. She didn't want to put on air. She didn't, in that world, folklore world, he is extremely famous. And she knew it and just didn't want to put on airs. She was fascinated by Hal Cannon. She never met him, but I think they talked on the phone. She would talk about Hal like she knew him. I knew he didn't. I mean, I might have dragged him down there once. And he started the Cowboy Poetry Festival, so she was aware of his work there, I think is why. And she'd also heard him on the radio. So she had a wide life from the center of her living room. And people that she didn't necessarily had never met and didn't know really, but she knew them. And that was always fascinating to me.
Did she send you did you have a correspondence with her?
Not that much, actually. I mean, I do have a few things she sent me, but not like Roxanne or Jim.
Did she ever send you poems that she wrote?
Yeah, she sent me. I mean, I have a couple, but no. She would send me those little foil angels. I got those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, no, I have a few letters from her, but not that much.
Yeah. Do you know who or what other writers perhaps that influenced her writing?
I don't know, really. She did have other poetry books on her shelf. I mean, I know she was self-educated and widely read. But I don't really know, and I can't say who would come to mind. But I could say that a lot of the poetry came from music. So when we're talking traditional music, we're talking Merle Haggard and Bonnie Owens. That would be kind of Woody Guthrie. Oh, how could I have left him out? I mean, she knew Woody Guthrie backwards and forwards. So I'd say music was certainly a huge influence. But I don't know who else. Did
she talk about other Oklahomans like maybe Will Rogers or anything like that in particular?
Not really. If I had brought up Will Rogers, she would have been talking about him. Bob Wills, she did talk about him. I mean, like I said, Merle Haggard, Buck Owens. She corresponded with some people here. And after she died, I mean, I heard from several of them. Dorothy Rose, I'm pretty sure, is one. There was another writer here that she did correspond with. Lillian knows who she is. I'm sure Roxanne would too. The name has slipped my mind. But a woman of basically her same age. She was pretty well known here, I believe. She was aware of some of the more major women writers of the time, like Teresa Jordan, Little Hassel Linda Hasselstrom, Linda Husse. I mean, Linda Husse is a poet, so, and she knew many others. But unfortunately, I'm not in that realm, so I can't come up with the names.
What do you think people in Oklahoma should know about Wilma?
Well, I think they should know that there's not a disconnect. I mean, I think that the California Okies are like immigrant culture, so they have an idolized version of Oklahoma, and they probably have taken the old Oklahoma that was here in the 30s and transported that to California. And Wilma was the epitome. I think that I would like to see a lot of Wilma in Oklahoma schools, because she tells the second half of the story that isn't known here, and it's not Steinbeck. And this is the real story, and that's important. And it's real story. These poems are accessible. They're easy to read, easy to understand, and I'd like to see them used in music.
Okay, is there anything else you'd like to add to the interview?
Just that it was an extraordinary privilege to get to know her. I think it was so fortunate. And yeah, she touched a lot of lives. And I'm hoping she will continue to touch a lot more through her work.
Well, I think your film will certainly help preserve her legacy in a lot of wonderful ways for people like me who never had the opportunity to meet her, which I'm so sorry about. But just having your film project and people being able to see her and hear her poetry and see the things that were so important to her is a great, wonderful thing. Thank you so much for your project and for the interview today as well.
Thank you for what you all are doing. It's wonderful.